Hello friends, welcome back to Aunt Debbie's Boutique. Today we're going to start on an adventure of making a sampler quilt. This is going to be geared towards beginners that are interested in getting into quilting or doing more quilting and would like to learn how to make some basic blocks. We're going to make 12 blocks over the next 12 days. Then we'll put them together with some sashing, and I'm going to have mine quilted by a long arm quilter, and then we'll put the binding on it. So for the next 2 weeks, we're going to be working on this quilt, and I invite you to join me and pull out some scraps and make the blocks as we go, and in the end, you'll have a nice quilt. Now, I have chosen something I had on hand. I have 2 of these layer cakes. It's called Buzzworthy, and I just love the colors in this. The golds and the blacks. And so I decided that I would just use, I didn't have any yardage to go with it. I think I bought them on sale from Missouri Star Quilt one time. And so I wanted to use them for something, and this is what that something is. You also need some background fabric, and I chose white because white's in there. We're going to use black for the sashing on this, and by the time we get to the end, I'll find something that goes on the back. I don't have anything at the moment, but I will find something. Now, I've already opened up one of these layer cakes and cut these first 3 quilt blocks out. This is 1, 2, and 3, and these cute little pins that are on these also came from Missouri Star Quilt, and I'm using them to designate which quilt block it is, but a lot of times you have multiple pieces and you want to keep them straight, so to have numeric or alphabetic pins to put in them sure helps keep you from getting lost or confused. You do not need a layer cake. You can just use scrap fabric or whatever you want, especially if this is your first quilt, but that's what I'm going to use. And hopefully I'll have plenty since I have 2 layer cakes. I really think I won't even use one. Okay, we're going to do block 1, so I'm going to put these other 2 blocks aside for now. And all of the blocks we're going to make are mainly squares and half square triangles. So the first thing on block 1 that you need are 4 background squares that are 4 inches. So 4-inch square, and we're going to need 4 background pieces that are 3.5-inch square. We're going to need 4 3.5-inch of a light color that's going to go in the center of our block, and then we're going to break it up with 4 dark colors. Now these are 4-inch squares. They could all be the same. I just wanted a little variety in the block, and these could all be different if you wanted. So we're going to start with these. The first thing we need to do is take our 4 blocks here, and we're going to draw a line from corner to corner on the back side, which with the white block, front and back are interchangeable, so just on one side doesn't want to mark. Now, I starched and ironed all these before I started, and I recommend you do the same. There are several things that will really make your quilt look better when it's done. One is accurate cutting. So when I say a 4-inch square, I mean exactly a 4-inch square. And it's a very good idea to have a ruler and some sort of cutting blade, rotary cutter, because you just can't get that kind of accuracy with a scissor. I mean, I guess you can, but it's very difficult. So the other thing that will make it turn out better is accuracy in your seam allowance. Make sure you're getting an exact 1/4-inch seam allowance. And the best way to do that is there's usually a mark on your machines that show you where 1/4 inch. Stitch it up or stitch up how you think is a 1/4 inch, and then go back and lay a clear ruler over it and see if it is. Now, I am finding with the recommendation of one of my viewers that I do better with a scant 1/4 inch, because when I get through, my blocks are either just barely big enough or sometimes just slightly smaller than they need to be. And so I've started sewing a scant, which is like one thread over that from a 1/4 inch. And then I can trim down my blocks if I need to. And we are going to be doing a lot of trimming. Okay, I'm going to take this and we're going to place these with right sides together on our dark 4-inch blocks. I'm going to take it over to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam down one side and back up the other side on all 4 of these. I'm going to chain stitch these, which means I'll start with this one and I won't even cut my thread. I'll go to the next one and the next one, and then I'll turn around and do the other side. That's just for efficiency. Now, I'm also going to use a leader, pretty tacky looking one, but to start my first seam. And that way I don't have to backstitch or make sure, you know, when you first start sewing, a lot of times if you aren't far enough in, it'll jam in your machine, or the first couple of stitches don't take unless you backstitch. This ensures that you've got a running start and you've got a good seam, and that you don't have to worry about backstitching then. And use a real small seam allowance. About 2.5 is what most people use, and that's what I'm going to be using. So let's take these over to the machine. One other thing, make sure you go to the extra effort to square these up. We can even put a pin or two in them if need be. I'll do that. But if you take all that time to cut them and trim them and all that stuff, and you sew them like this, you've defeated your purpose. So we want to make sure our blocks are square. Since I cut these out of a layer cake, I've got those silly pinked edges, which I don't really like because it's hard to measure as exact. But on these, it's measured from the bottom of the little notches. So when you're measuring, that's where you measure from there to the other side. Okay, let's take these over to the machine and chain down both sides. Okay, I'm going to cut these apart, the threads. And then we're going to cut down that line that we drew. And this doesn't have to be particularly accurate. Therefore, I'm just using my scissors, because this is all going to be in the seam allowance. And this is what we call a half square triangle. It's a square made up of two triangles. Okay, now we need to open each of these, and we want to press it towards the darker side. Let me put my pressing board on here. Now we want to be careful and not to tug on that seam too much, because this is a bias seam, which means it will stretch, and you can stretch your quilt block out of shape, and we don't want that. Now I want to square up these blocks. Now, to square them up, I'm going to use this 45-degree angle on my ruler here. This is a 4.5-inch ruler. I don't have a 4, so we're just going to use it. And we want that setting on the seam allowance. Just a minute. Okay, to square these up, I'm going to use this square. I don't have a 3.5-inch, or I'd use that. This is a 4.5-inch. So there's a 45-degree line on that we want laying right on top of that seam. And then I'm just going to pretend that I'm just going to chop off this bottom inch, because since it's 4.5 and I need 3.5. And I want to make sure that this edge is either right on the 3.5-inch or a little further. This one is right at the 1 or a little further. And then I can cut off. Oh, and I just did something I shouldn't have. Don't cut towards yourself. So now I'm lining, since I've cut this side, I'm lining this up with the 1 inch, this up with the 1 inch, and I'm making sure that that line is right on my seam. And I'm trimming off the excess. Now, there's excess because I used a scant 1/4-inch seam on this, because I would rather trim some off than have them too small. Okay, let me trim these up real quick, and then we'll start putting our block together. Okay, we have all those trimmed up now, so they're perfect 3.5-inch blocks. And I'm a little slow with that. It'd been easier if I'd had a 3.5-inch ruler, but we got it done. Okay, now then, let's put our block together. We're gonna have, these are also 3.5-inch squares. We're gonna have a background square in each corner. Then I want a square like this and like this, so it's kind of like rabbit ears. And they're the same print. And then like this and like this. So once again, we have our rabbit ears. And in the center is going to go this block. Then we want this and this. And then this one. This one. And there's our block. Now, the way I'm going to sew this together is chain stitching again. I'm going to fold all the second one over on the first one. And I'm going to sew a 1/4-inch seam right down here. Then I'm going to chain it right into the next one, next one, next one. Then I'll open this back up after it's sewn and come get the next row and sew onto them, and then the last row. So let's go to the sewing machine and do that. Remember, it's very important that you square up your block. And once again, I'm going to pin mine before I go over there, just to make sure. But where it's really going to be important is when we add the next 2 rows to it. Make sure they're squared up, because we went to all that trouble to trim them perfectly square. But if we sewed them even ever so slightly off, it's going to throw your whole quilt block off. I'm sorry, I did not have the camera on for the first 2 rows. But I have been stitching just like I told you I would, straight down and then adding one. And now I'm working on the last row. Want to make sure the square is squarely on top of the other square. Okay, now that we've got all our rows sewed together this way, we need to sew them together this way. But before we do that, let's press them, the seams, and so that everything nests just like it's supposed to. I'm going to press one row, one direction, and the very next row, the opposite direction. And sometimes this is a little tricky because you've already got seams that are pressed in there and you don't want to mess them up. And my iron's not hot enough for steam. There it is. Okay, the reason we go to all this trouble to have our seams go in different directions is to eliminate the bulk so that some seams aren't bulkier than others. But if you accidentally get one going the wrong way, it's not the end of the world. It just will make for a nicer finished block when you're done. And the reason we don't open them is because they can pull apart, especially when you're quilting and stuff. So iron them to one side or the other gives the quilt strength. Now that we've got those all ironed, I think I'll iron it on this side too. Make sure everything's laying down like it's supposed to. Now I'm going to take it over and I'm going to sew these rows together. And because we did our chain stitching, they're already stitched at the intersections, which makes it really nice for lining things up. But you want to make sure you've got one seam going one direction, one the other, and that the seam itself is sitting right on top of each other. And you can kind of feel it nesting in there. So I like to pin all my intersections before I go to the sewing machine. And I do it on all layers. Okay, this seam's going this way, this one's going this way, and this is already a bulky seam because of all the points coming together. This seam's going this way, this one this way. I want to make sure and get it nested right there, which because of that stitch holding it together, it's very close anyway. Okay, I'm going to pin all the blocks before I go over there. Now that our block is sewn together, we just have to press our last seams. And I'm going to press them all the same way. And try not to mess up the seams that are already pressed. Now, that block is laying nice and flat. Let's measure it. We need a 12.5-inch block. All of our blocks are going to be that size. They'll be 12 inches once they're trimmed. Once they're sewn. Okay. I'm going to line this line up on the center, and I'm off a little bit at my point right there, but luckily it's the same fabric. And line this up on a line. And I know I'm going to have to be 1/4 of an inch over on each side. And it looks like I did a pretty good job. So let's grab a ruler here. I'm going to get a different cutter. That one's not working very well for some reason. And I just put a new blade in it. So we want it to hang over 1/4 of an inch here. So all I ended up shaving off was just this much. Actually, since I've trimmed one side, I'm just going to line this up on an edge and do a 1/2 inch over here. So that would make it 12.5. I'll get a little more to trim over here. Now you'll see I cut off this point a little bit. I should have maybe trimmed a little more over here and not so much over here. So that is not a good thing when you're looking for perfection, but I think we all strive for perfection, but I think we need to be happy with whatever we're able to obtain, because nobody in this world is perfect, and we're too hard on ourselves sometimes. See, just some slivers on that side. Once again, I'm going to line this up so that it's a 1/2 inch. Okay, there is our finished block. I think it looks really pretty, and this is block 1 of our series. Like I said, there's going to be 12, so join me again tomorrow for block number 2. They're all going to be different. They're all going to be fairly simple and just a way to challenge yourself to learn how to make different quilt blocks. You can also, if you find a block you really like, you can make an entire quilt out of that block. All right, thank you for joining me. If you would, please like and subscribe, and tune in tomorrow, and we will do block 2. Thank you, and remember, whatever you do, do it to the glory of the Lord.